If you're being asked what's actually driving pipeline and your answer is some version of it depends, this is why. Most marketing teams report pipeline, MQLs, and activity. But when you actually ask what caused this opportunity to happen, the honest answer is they don't really know. And it's rarely a case of being bad at their job and has almost everything to do with the measurement model not being set up to answer that question. The answer is not to keep refining an antiquated MQL model. It's actually to start measuring marketing in a way that really reflects how pipeline gets created in the real world. Because the reality is that marketing has evolved massively over the last decade, and AI is just accelerating that even faster. But measurement hasn't kept up. As a marketing leader, your job is to know what's actually working, not just what's easy to report, so that you can confidently invest in what's driving pipeline. The MQL was built on assumptions about how buying works that were never really accurate. Most CMOs, they already know this. What they don't have is a clear framework for what to do instead. I've spent the last several years working with over 200 marketing leaders on this exact problem. And so in this video, I'm going to show you why the MQL model breaks down, what it's missing, and what you should be tracking alongside it. So let's talk about why MQL stopped working or never really worked to begin with. Marketing generates interest. They nurture that interest, and at some point, they signal when a person is ready to talk to sales. So companies introduce things like scoring, combining engagement, like content downloads or webinar attendance, with firmographic data, like company size or job title, to decide when a lead is qualified. And on the surface, yeah, that works. It's simple, it's measurable, but most importantly, it's something that leadership can understand. But here's where that breaks down, because over time, MQL volume became the metric, not what actually happens after that. So teams started optimizing for what creates more leads. And that creates a much bigger problem because the MQL tells you almost nothing about what happens after the handoff to sales. You can't see how much effort it actually took to work that lead to an opportunity, how long it took, or whether it ever really had a chance of converting. So you end up in a situation where marketing is hitting MQL targets, but pipeline is down, and nobody can explain why. Because the metric itself was never designed to answer that question. It was designed to measure throughput, not outcomes. Over time, it got worse because once teams started getting measured on MQL volume, the goal stopped being about quality and became about quantity. So what happened? The definition of qualified lead kept expanding, right? Somebody downloads an ebook, qualified. They attend a webinar, qualified. They visit a few pages on your website, qualified. Let's pass them to sales. And because teams were being graded on the number of MQLs, what happens is thresholds kept getting lowered. More behaviors got added until eventually almost nothing counted. And when that happens, the score itself for a lead becomes meaningless. There's also a timing problem most teams miss. MQL models often treat old engagement the same as fresh engagement. So if somebody did something 6 or 12 months ago, that can carry the same weight as something they did yesterday. But those are not the same signal. So now you have a system where qualification is inflated, intent is unclear, and the score looks precise, but isn't actually telling you anything useful. Even if you fix all of that, there's still a bigger problem underneath it. The MQL is not a signal of buying. It's merely a timestamp. It tells you when somebody became qualified in your system, not when they entered their buying process. And those two things are not the same. By the time somebody becomes an MQL, they may have already started evaluating other vendors, they may have built a short list, or maybe they've ruled you out entirely. So now you have a situation where marketing is being graded on a metric that tells your leadership almost nothing about where that buyer actually is in their own decision process. When that happens, teams start to fix the wrong thing, like tightening their scoring models, adding more rules, or even revising SLAs. But none of that changes the core issue, because the problem isn't how you define an MQL, it's that the metric itself isn't aligned to how buying actually works. Now, if you're seeing this in your own data, there's a clear path forward. We've put together a full breakdown of what modern marketing measurement actually looks like and what to layer in alongside MQL volume so you can start making better decisions. If you want that, grab it by using the first link in the description. Underneath all of this is a more fundamental problem. The entire MQL model assumes that buying happens in a clean, linear way. One person moving through one sequence from awareness to qualification to pipeline. But that's not how B2B buying works. Buyers don't move in a straight line. They research on their own, disengage, and come back later. involve multiple stakeholders, and form opinions long before they ever convert on anything that you can track. So by the time somebody becomes an MQL, you're only seeing a small piece of a much bigger journey. In many cases, they weren't even in a buying window to begin with, which means you're not just dealing with incomplete information, you're often measuring people who are never going to convert at all, and then trying to explain pipeline outcomes using that, which is why the model breaks down so quickly. And this gets even harder because of how your CRM is structured. A lead or a contact record is one-dimensional. It's tied to a single person and treated like one continuous journey. But that's not how buying actually happens. People don't move in a singular clean life cycle. They engage, they disengage, they come back later, they get requalified, and repeat that cycle multiple times. But your CRM doesn't track those as separate moments. The lead record collapses all of this information into one record, which means you lose the history of what actually happened over time. The first interaction, why it didn't convert, what changed it later, all of that gets blurred together and overwritten. And when that happens, you can't see the patterns that actually drive outcomes. Here's a simple way to think about it. Imagine a patient goes to a hospital with chest pain. They get treated, they leave, maybe they get a prescription. Then 6 months later, they come back with the same issue. If their record only showed the most recent visit, you'd miss the most important signal that this has happened before. That pattern is what actually tells you what is going on. It's the same thing here. Your system shows you the latest snapshot, but not the full sequence of events that led to the outcome. Okay, so here's how you solve this without overhauling your data or systems. So instead of trying to force everything into one continuous lead record, we automatically break the journey into individual attempts. Every time somebody moves through your process, whether they convert, drop off, or come back later, each of those things is treated as its own moment. So you don't have to reconstruct this manually. You just see what actually happened. That includes when marketing passes a lead to sales, when sales reaches out proactively, and when somebody gets re-engaged over time. Pipeline isn't created in one clean motion. It's usually the result of multiple attempts across both marketing and sales over time. But your system collapses all of that into one journey, which is why effort often gets blurred, teams debate credit, and it's almost entirely impossible to see what actually worked. So once you separate those attempts into each individual moments or episodes, everything changes because you can finally see what actually happened, not just the final outcome, but the sequence of things that led to it in the first place. And once you can see that, 3 things become extremely clear. First, you can see what a successful path actually looks like versus all of the things that didn't work. Second, you can see how much effort is really being spent on leads that were never going to convert. Time, sales effort, sales cycles, and resources. And third, you can cleanly identify which leads are worth continuing to invest in and which ones are not. So instead of optimizing for more leads, you can start optimizing for better outcomes and have the ability to know that. I want to show you an example of what this actually looks like in the real world with one of our customers. They passed 1,700 MQLs to sales over a 3-month period. Out of those, only about 5 actually qualified. That's 0.2%. Those 1,700 leads produced $180K in pipeline and $0 in revenue. Now, here's what's important. Over 20% of what their SDR team was working each month was coming from that bucket of MQLs, but less than 2% of pipeline came from those leads. And again, 0 revenue. Their first instinct was to blame sales. When we look closer, we could actually see that each of those leads was being worked for a period of 60 days, multiple attempts, multiple touches, before eventually being disqualified due to the fact that they had no response. So what looked healthy in a flow of leads was actually a massive drain on sales capacity. And this is exactly the problem. If you only look at MQL volume, it looks like the system is working. But when you look at what actually happens after, you can see how inefficient it really is. So if MQLs don't actually tell you what's working, well, what should you be tracking instead? We're not saying to remove MQLs, right? MQLs are deeply embedded into how boards and leadership teams evaluate marketing. So removing them without a clear alternative isn't realistic. The shift is this: you don't replace MQLs. You layer in better metrics alongside them, metrics that actually show you what happens after this handoff to sales. And before we get into those metrics, there's one mindset shift to make. A lot of pressure on marketing comes from the idea that every activity needs a direct, trackable line to revenue. But MQLs reinforce that by pushing teams to optimize for what's easy to track, not what actually moves deals forward. which is why most teams end up over-investing at the top of the funnel, while the parts of marketing that actually influence deals and create revenue get under-measured. So here's the reframe. The question is not how many leads did marketing generate, it's how many times did we pass a qualified person to sales and what happened next? From there are 3 core things to track. First, prospects. This is every time somebody is passed to sales, not just individual leads. Not one MQL per person, but literally every distinct handoff or every attempt sales makes to work that person. This is because the same person may be worked multiple times before an opportunity is ever created. This gives you a real view of the handoff volume, the reason the lead was handed off, the handoff quality, and how the journey unfolded after that. Second is pipeline impact. What actually happens after those handoffs? Specifically, what percentage convert to an opportunity and what that opportunity is worth, broken down by segment and the type of marketing engagement that happened before handoff. This is where you stop measuring inputs and you really start to measure what actually worked and what moves the needle for the business. Third is win rate and deal size. Win rate shows you where your motion is actually working, and deal size shows you where real revenue is coming from, not just volume and opportunities, because not all pipeline is created equal. Some motions create a lot of activity, but very little revenue. When you put those together, you get a much clearer picture of where marketing is actually driving meaningful growth and where it isn't, and the areas to focus on. Now, if you've watched this video and you're thinking, this is exactly what we're dealing with at our organization, the reality is you don't need to go figure this all out yourself. We've built this directly into our platform at Passetto. We connect your existing systems and surface this automatically, which means you don't need to make RevOps changes or changes to your data architecture. So you can actually see what's happening across marketing and sales, what's driving pipeline, and where your team is spending time that isn't converting without having to rebuild your data or rebuild your processes. If that's something you want to see in your own environment, there's a link below where you can book a call. And if you want to go deeper, check out this video next.